Moses went up on the mountain, brought down the tablets, shattered them. That happened after 40 days and 40 nights. Then he went back up again, plead with God to spare the people and not destroy them because of what they did. Creation of the golden calf. And God says to Moses when he came down, take some sapphire, use some of the stones there, and bring it up to the mountain. I will engrave in it the 10 Commandments. So Moses was up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and another 40 days and 40 nights, and another 40 days and 40 nights. The first one represents the idea of Torah. So God gave him the Torah, but when he gave him the 10 Commandments, it wasn't just 10 Commandments. You don't need 40 days to read 10 Commandments. You can do it in probably 2 minutes or less. He was taught all of Judaism, all of Jewish knowledge, Jewish law, Jewish philosophy, Jewish mysticism, everything there is to know in Judaism. He taught him in those 40 days and 40 nights. So the first 40 days and 40 nights correspond to the idea of Torah, the knowledge of Torah. The second 40 days and 40 nights correspond to prayer. That's when he was beseeching God, imploring God to forgive the people. The third 4 days and 40 nights represents the quality of teshuvah, of repentance, of return. And God gives him the second set of tablets, and he comes down with those second set of tablets, which was God's way of telling the people that he had forgiven them. He's giving them another chance. And when did he come down? He came down, if you count, it's very easy to figure this out. When the Torah was given on the 6th day of the month of Shabbat, the 3rd month of the year, counting from Nisan. And if you count 40 days, another 40 days, another 40 days, it ends up with the 10th day of Tishrei, which happens to be Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And that's the first Day of Atonement where God demonstrated by giving Moses the second tablets that he had forgiven the people. Now, when Moses comes down from the mountain with the second set of tablets, there's no fanfare. Everything is low-key. The first time we heard the 10 Commandments, there was a major gathering of all the people. There was a lot of fanfare, a lot of tumult. And the second time, God says, you know what? It's going to be quiet. It's going to be low-key. When things are noisy, boisterous, and chaotic, negative things can happen. Sometimes you have to be modest, and those are the things that really endure. So Moses comes down on Yom Kippur, on the Day of Atonement, and the next day he gathers the entire Jewish people together. For what purpose? To tell them about the instructions that he received from God to build a Mishkan. Mishkan is the Tabernacle, which was a portable sanctuary that God wanted them to build in the desert. Now, what is the connection between that and Yom Kippur? The Mishkan, I'll use the Hebrew word from now on, the Mishkan was God's way of telling the people, I am willing to live and dwell amongst you, even though you sinned and you alienated yourselves from me. I have forgiven you, and I will take up residence in your sanctuary that you will build for me. And through that, God will dwell in each and every person. So in order to give the instructions how to build this, Moses gathers the entire Jewish community, and he tells them these are the things that God commanded to do. And then he goes off on a tangent. 6 days you shall do work. On the 7th day, it should be a day of holiness, a day of resting to God. Whoever does any work on this day shall die. Don't kindle any fires in all of your dwelling place on the day of Shabbos, on the Sabbath. And then Moses tells the people, this is what God commands you to do, and start contributing all the different resources for the construction of this temple. So silt, the gold, the silver, the copper, and so on. So how does the laws of the Sabbath were already given to them in the Ten Commandments. That's the fourth of the Ten Commandments. So why is he repeating it over here when he's gathering them to give them a message about the sanctuary? Why does he got to go off on a tangent on Shabbat? So there are many explanations, but the one that is the most significant one is that God was telling them, as important as it may be to build the sanctuary, I don't want you to build it on Shabbat, on the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a day when you commemorate the creation of the world by God, and you invoke God's role as the creator and the master. And that takes precedence over the sanctuary. And many times people think that they're going to create different methods of getting closer to God. And people are creative and they can think of a lot of different ideas. And they forget that we have no way of telling God what he should do. In other words, you can't tell God, I'm going to do X, and by doing X, I want you to like me. You have to ask God if he's interested in you doing X or Y or Z. So God is telling us, as important as it is to build this sanctuary, the observance of Shabbos, of the Sabbath, is more important. And even if the temple would not be built because you're resting on the Sabbath, that takes precedence, the resting on the Sabbath. Now, one of the commandments over here is not to light a fire, kindle a fire in all your dwelling places on Shabbat. What does that mean? So there were groups of people who broke away from traditional Judaism. One of the first such groups were called the Tzaddukim, the Sadducees. The Sadducees were a breakaway group who denied the belief in what we call the oral Torah. When God gave the commandments, not just the 10 commandments, all 613, he gave them in a very rudimentary form, just a meager statement without the details. For example, just as we just word of it, don't do any work on Shabbos. How do you define the word work, or the Hebrew word malacha? How do you define it? If I ask 10 people how to define work, I may get 10 different answers. Someone will tell you what you consider work to me is leisure. An artist, for example, an artist will say, so to me that's the most restful thing to draw on Shabbat. But that's one of the things that you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. But it doesn't say that in the Torah. So how do we know how to define work? And the answer is, when God told Moses to give over this commandment not to work on the Sabbath, he also told him what work means. What does work mean? Work has a specific connotation. It doesn't mean doing some hard labor. That's not in the spirit of the Shabbat, but that's not what work is. In other words, I could take this table, or I can't take this table and track it upstairs. But if I had 2 people helping me, 3 people helping me, we could schlep this table upstairs, but it wouldn't be a violation of the Sabbath. It would be I can't say it wouldn't be a violation, but it wouldn't be a violation of not doing work. That's not the definition of work. The definition of work is the creative, physical actions that were needed in order to build the Mishkan, the Tabernacle. That's another reason why the 2 laws are juxtaposed. You have the laws of the Sabbath and the laws of creating the sanctuary. That whatever was involved in building the sanctuary is what you're not allowed to do on the Shabbat. And among those things would be doing artwork, doing writing, and the one that's mentioned here explicitly, and there are actually 39 categories, is do not light a fire, don't kindle a fire in all your dwelling places. So what is the definition of not kindling? So the Sadducees, who didn't believe in and accept the oral tradition, took it very literally that you're not allowed to have fire in your home on Shabbat. So what would they do in the middle of the winter? They would sit in the cold because they couldn't have fire in the fireplace. They would eat cold food because you can't cook. You can't have fire burning. And they would sit in the dark at night. But that's not the way it was transmitted to Moses. When Moses received this commandment, he was told that it means You're not allowed to kindle a fire, to ignite a fire. You can't strike a match on Shabbat or any other way of creating fire. But if there's fire there from before Shabbat, be my guest. You can have every benefit you want from that fire and from that light and that energy. And that's one of the reasons. There are actually at least four reasons why we light Shabbat candles before sunset on Shabbat. This reason, I'll mention the other reasons after this. This reason is to demonstrate that we do not accept the Sadducees' this distortion and misinterpretation of the commandment not to have a fire. Yes, you can have fire. You should have fire in your house on Shabbat by lighting it, by kindling the flames before Shabbat, before sunset. The custom is to wait, to do it 18 minutes before sunset, to make sure you do it on time. So in order to demonstrate our fidelity to the oral tradition, because all of Judaism is based on the Torah, Bible, with the oral tradition, which was later on put into writing in the Talmud, in other words. Without the oral tradition, the written tradition is meaningless, because you can't tell anybody what the words mean when it talks about not doing work. It doesn't use the word work, obviously. It uses the Hebrew word malacha. What exactly does that mean? That was given over in the oral tradition. So that's one reason why we light Shabbat candles, to demonstrate that we are faithful to the entire body of the Torah, which incorporates the written and the oral Torah. The other three reasons for lighting Shabbat candles is to create peace in the home, domestic peace. If you wouldn't have fire or light in the house, what would happen? People would stumble over pieces of wood or stone. And when you stumble and you get hurt, who do you blame? You blame your spouse or your kids. And then they answer back and they get into an argument. It creates an atmosphere of discord and of division. So we light the Shabbos candles because it creates a spirit of peace. And even if it's not going to cause people to fight with one another, light itself has a characteristic that it promotes a certain type of serenity, and that serenity enhances the peace in the home. Shabbat is that when we greet each other, one of the greetings we have is Shabbat Shalom, a peaceful Shabbat. The whole idea of Shabbat is to bring peace. That's why the Messianic age is referred to as the sabbatical age. Why? Because there will be universal peace. Not just one day a week, but every day. It will be perennial. It will be forever. The third reason why we light Shabbat candles is to enhance the enjoyment of the Shabbat. When you're eating a meal, which is mandatory on Shabbat, to eat a festive meal, so if you can't see the food, you don't enjoy it. That's why I never understood why restaurants dim the lights. How could you enjoy the food if you don't know what you're eating? I wouldn't even trust what they put in front of me if I couldn't see it. But that's the culture today we're living in. But in the Talmud, it says the opposite, that when people were in the desert, they had the best food possible, the manna from heaven. And the manna from heaven had a miraculous character to it, that you tasted whatever taste you wanted. If you like steak, it tasted like steak. It looked like tofu, but it tasted like steak if you like steak. If you like ice cream, it tasted like ice cream. Whatever taste you wanted, it was fantastic. And yet, the Torah describes how the manna afflicted, the people felt afflicted by eating the manna. So the Talmud asks, why were they afflicted? What was so terrible about the manna? It was the most ideal food. It was the healthiest food, most spiritually nourishing food, and it was the tastiest food. And the answer is they couldn't see the steak. You look at a piece of manna, it was a bland seed. It didn't look like the taste that you were going to enjoy. And when you can't see what you're eating, it's affliction. You don't enjoy it as much. So therefore on Shabbat, we light the candles to bring light, to illuminate the Shabbat table so that we see the food and we enjoy it more. Now that we have electricity and we don't need candlelight, the candle lighting enhances the enjoyment. So we still light the Shabbos candles for that reason. But the main reason for Shabbat candles is to honor the Shabbat. It's a symbol of honor when you light candles. And Shabbat, we're not only obligated to enjoy, not only obligated to refrain from work, we're also obligated to honor it. And by lighting candles before the Shabbat, like you would light candles for an honored guest coming into your home, that is another reason why to light Shabbat candles. So we have these 4 different reasons. Now, here Moses gathers all the people. This happened right after Yom Kippur. And what does he tell them about building the tabernacle? What you see over here is the whole universe is divided into 3 components. If it doesn't fit into one of those 3, it doesn't exist. The most ancient book of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism, it's called Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, and it's ascribed to Abraham, the patriarch Abraham. It's a small book, about 2-3 pages. And it has the secrets of creation in it. It's a very cryptic book. But that book mentions that all of creation is divided into these 3 categories. One is called Olam, world, or space. Shana, year, or time. Nefesh, soul, or energy. What exists in the universe that doesn't fit into those 3? It's either subject to space, occupies space, stable occupies space. Then there's time, which Einstein said are connected. Time and space are connected, but it's not Einstein. Maimonides says that 850 years ago already. It's a well-known thing in Judaism that time and space are related. So you have space, you have time, and you have soul, vitality, life, energy. So here you have all these 3 coming together in one unified way. You have the Mishkan, that's God as he manifests himself through space, in space. It's a designated area that has to occupy a certain measured distance from one place to another. The dimensions were very crucial. So with space, it happened in relation to Yom Kippur. And then he gives a commandment to observe the Shabbat, which is a weekly Yom Kippur in a way. So that's God manifesting himself in time. And then you have the entire Jewish people congregated here as God manifests himself through the community collectively as they're all standing together. So this is the most powerful concentration of divine energy. You have the space, time, and soul all together, locked up into one. When the Mishkan is described, it talks about the various vessels in the Mishkan. Each vessel had a function. There was a table that had the bread on it. There was an altar upon which they would burn incense. Another altar where they would burn the sacrifices. You also had the ark, which contained the tablets. That was the most important part. Then you had the menorah, the candelabrum. Now, when the Torah describes all these vessels, as they're called, it doesn't say what their function is. We know what the function is. It's mentioned in other places. With one exception. When it talks about the menorah, it says the menorah was there for light, for illumination. Why, the question is asked, why does the Torah describe the menorah's function to illuminate, and it doesn't do it for the other vessels? So one answer to this question is, the menorah was the most exquisite part of the Mishkan. The menorah was made out of solid gold in the most ornate fashion. It had different decorations on it, flowers, apples, and goblets, and was fashioned out of pure gold, to the point that Moses didn't know how to build it. It was so meticulously created God told him, just take the gold and throw it into the fire, and out came the menorah. God is the only one who can do it. If someone would see the menorah, they would think of it as a decoration for the Mishkan, for the Tabernacle. Decoration. It's like a museum piece. People would come just to see the menorah. And the Torah says, no, that's not what the menorah was about. It was not there just to be a museum piece. It was there to illuminate. Judaism doesn't put that much focus on objects for the sake of the object itself. It's what you do with the object. And especially the menorah. The purpose of the menorah was to bring light into the world. And that's when the Torah focuses on the light. Now, the menorah itself had 7 branches. Of these 7 branches, one of the branches was referred to with a special title called the Western Lamp, Ner Hamaravi, the Western Lamp. That Western Lamp was unique because during the entire duration of the first temple and in the beginning of the second temple, a miracle occurred. That when they would pour oil in that cup, the Western cup, it's supposed to last the night. They would light the menorah before sunset and it would last the entire night. This Ner Maravi, this Western lamp, lasted 24 hours. It never extinguished. They would have to extinguish it in order to rekindle it every day. There was a mitzvah, a commandment to rekindle it every day, but it would never extinguish. This was a unique candle, but the way it's described is it's the Western lamp. The Hebrew word for west is ma'arav, maravi. It also has other meanings. Besides meaning west, it also means the mixture of different elements, and it also means sweet. The menorah, which is the symbol of Torah, Torah's referred to as a source of light. Torah is a mixture of many hues, of many colors, of many characteristics. And if you look at Judaism, the paradox of Judaism is that it has everything, even contradictory characteristics. For example, if someone asks you, does Judaism celebrate intellect? Absolutely. Jews have always focused on and concentrated on using the mind to understand. God wants us to use our minds to understand the teachings of the Torah. That's what the Talmud is all about. People questioning, arguing, giving answers, asking other questions, and going in debates around and around, because that's what God gave us a brain for. What do you think He gave us a brain? So we could build houses? God doesn't need those houses. He gave us a brain so we can fathom God's knowledge, God's teachings. But Judaism is also into the emotional aspects of life. Judaism puts tremendous focus on prayer, on expressing your heartfelt feelings, on showing love for God and love for your fellow. Judaism is also about practice. There were other detractors from Judaism who said, God doesn't care if you do this mitzvah or that mitzvah. He just wants the heart. Yes, God wants the heart, but He wants us to practice our Judaism not just with our feelings, with our mind, but also with our hands. That's why we have so many of the commandments require certain physical actions. So we have all these different hues and different colors. Judaism is simultaneously rational and mystical. Judaism is in one hand very warm and inviting and beautiful and exciting, and on the other hand it's also very demanding and rigid. Which one is it? It's all. It has so many different hues and colors. That's what the menorah is all about. But it also has to be sweet. Sweet means that Judaism wants people to feel sweetness of Torah. That's why if you look at it, Jewish history, the most precious thing that a Jew had was the study of Torah. He was in love with it. It was so sweet and so beautiful. And when we teach Torah, we hope that we teach it with sweetness, not with harshness, but with sweetness. One of the verses in the Torah, after Moses gives people the instructions, it says the people left Moses. What does that mean, they left Moses? So one of the commentaries explains that they didn't wait for Moses to say they're dismissed. They just rushed out to do what they had to do to collect for the creation of the Tabernacle, the Mishkan. And that's not respectful. So this commentator, Or Chaim, who lived 250 so years ago, he died around 1710, around then. So how many years is that? It's all 300 years, actually. So this commentator points out to a principle mentioned in the Talmud that hatred, when a person has the pathological hatred, it messes your mind. You do things that are irrational, that are not becoming of you. Because hatred has a way of perverting your sense of righteousness, of decency. By the same token, love has the same effect. When you love something, you'll be so passionate about it, you won't think. And you'll just do things that may be disrespectful and may be unconventional and may be not so nice, but you're so in love, you don't think straight. And the Rashi's commentary on the Torah gives two examples, and one example for each. The heathen prophet Bilam was sent to curse the Jewish people. He was an evil, vile man. And the Torah describes how he saddled his own donkey. Here is this distinguished prophet who was being paid huge amounts, offered huge amounts, being given the greatest honor. He was like on top of the world, and he had to saddle his own donkey. In those days, it was like if you were a nobody, you saddled your own donkey. If you were somebody, you had servants, you had aides. So Rashi said it because he had such hatred for the Jewish people that he wanted to curse them so badly that he just lost his sense of propriety. He lost the sense of dignity. And he saddled his own donkey. That's what happens when you have hatred. And I think there's a connection to the Megillah. We just read the story of Haman, who came to the king to ask him to hang Mordechai, the hero of Purim. When does he come to consult, to tell the king or ask the king? Middle of the night. His family members told him, because he was so upset when he saw Mordechai and Mordechai didn't bow down to him, his family member says, why don't you build this gallows and tomorrow go to the king and ask the king for permission to have Mordechai hanged. Haman doesn't wait till tomorrow. He builds the gallows right away and he rushes to the king in the middle of the night. Now, which normal person would go to a king in the middle of the night and wake him up without expecting to have his head chopped off? I mean, you don't do, in those days, you don't do those things to a king. He behaved so irrationally. Why? Because he was consumed with hatred. When you're consumed with hatred, you'll do the most irrational things that makes no sense, that are self-defeating, that are detrimental to your cause. But then, Rashi says to Bilam, going back to the heathen prophet, you think you're going to be able to harm the Jewish people? Their ancestor, Abraham, did the same thing. When God told him to bring his son Isaac as a sacrifice, it says Abraham saddled his own donkey. Why did he saddle his own donkey? He had servants. Because he was in such love with God and doing what God asked him to do, that he just did something that was unconventional, that was not as dignified as he would normally have others do it for him. This was something because of the love that he had. So here is what happened when the Jewish people were told that they're going to build a Mishkan. They were so enthused, they were so excited, they were so passionate about it, such love that they had, because their love that they had for God before they sinned is nothing compared to the love they had after they repented. And they rushed out without saying to Moses, without waiting for Moses to say, now you can go. They just rushed out because they had this love. And that explains another enigma when it comes to the way the Torah describes the Mishkan. The Torah, when it teaches us the laws, is very succinct. It gives it to us in the briefest form. Why? Because all the details were transmitted orally. So the Torah is only an outline. It's like a professor who comes to the lecture with his notes. Now, if a student doesn't want to hear the lecture, who wants to have the information, and he steals the notes, it's not going to help him, because the notes are only good for the professor, because he knows the subject matter, so the notes remind him of what he has to say. But if the student grabs the notes, the student will be left befuddled. He won't know what the teacher is going to teach. So the Torah is written in very brief, very succinct, very cryptic form, except for a few things in the Torah. The story of Abraham's servant Eliezer and how he travels to find a wife for his master's son Isaac. The Torah repeats that story over and over. Why does the Torah repeat that story? So Rashi quotes the Talmud that God had such love for the patriarchs. He so cherished them because what they did, what Abraham did, he revolted against the whole world that believed in many idols. And he introduced the idea of monotheism to the world and justice and righteousness to a world that was a cruel world, a sadistic world. He earned such appreciation from God, such love, that the Torah repeats itself over and over again because even the words of his servants were so cherished. It's like getting a love letter. You're separated from a loved one for years and you finally get a letter, and the letter doesn't say very much, just some, you would think, platitudes. I love you, I miss you, and you'll take the letter out every now and then and just read it again and again. But you know what the letter says. There's nothing new in the letter, but because it's a letter that you love, that you cherish so much, it's so precious to you, you'll read it over and over. So the Torah repeats certain things over and over because it's so precious. And that answers the question why the Torah devotes so much attention to the Mishkan, to the Tabernacle. Of the 53 sections of the Torah, 4 almost entire sections are devoted to the construction, to the contributions of the materials and the construction itself, and how Moses gives them the instruction, how he repeats it. It's almost how many verses? I'd say it's a total of close to 500 verses. The whole Torah has about 5,000, so it's about 10% of the whole Torah is about the Mishnah, repeated over and over, because it was so precious to God and to the people. It was precious to God because God wants to show his love for his people. Because in the Torah you read a lot about how God is angry when people sin, but you don't focus as much, people don't focus as much on how God loves us. And because he loves us, he chastises us and he wants us to behave. So it's God's expression of how much love he has for us. He says, I'm willing to live, I'm moving in with you. Just build me the sanctuary and I will dwell in it. And by the same token, it's the greatest expression of love that we have. Here we messed up terribly. We never messed up as badly as we did when we worshipped the golden calf 40 days after hearing God tell us not to have any other gods. There can't be a greater betrayal of that love affair. So you think the marriage is over. In most marriages, that wouldn't bring the end to the marriage when a spouse is not faithful. And here the Jews were unfaithful. Not all of them, but a significant number. Enough that God was upset at everyone. Even at Moses, God was upset because he is the leader. And God tells Moses, go down from the mountain. And what does going down mean? It doesn't just mean physically going down. Obviously, if you're on a mountain, you have to go down. It means you have degraded, you have become denigrated. You've been demoted because your people have sinned and you're their leader. So everyone was really in the dumps. People were devastated when they saw how God was so upset at them. And then God says, you know what? I'm willing to forgive you. I'm going to give you a second set of tablets. But more than that, I'm going to dwell amongst you. You're going to build a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell in that sanctuary, and through that sanctuary in you. I will live with you. Our marriage has been repaired. That's the greatest, the most cherished feeling that the Jewish people had. That's why the Torah repeats it over and over again, because it's a love letter more than any other section of the Torah. And that's why the Jewish people, every day, we pray several times a day for the reconstruction of the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, which was the continuation of the Mishkan. Mishkan was a temporary dwelling. That became the permanent one, because that represents God saying, I am in love with you and I'm willing to live with you and dwell within you. Well, regardless of any of the things that we did in the past that compromise that relationship, God is saying that I am going to live among you. Have you one more sayings? Just to, when, well, that's really more related to next week's parsha, so I'll leave it for next week. That's the long subject. Who was the architect of the Mishkan? Designed it. A young kid. His name was Betzalel. In Israel, they have an institute for art called the Betzalel Institute, named after his Betzalel. The Torah describes him. He's the son of Uri, who was the son of Hur, who was the son of Hur. And Rashi tells us Hur was the son of Miriam, Moses' sister. And that is repeated several times. Usually when the Torah mentions a name, it'll mention the name and the father's name. It doesn't go back that many generations. And here, and in several other places, the Torah goes back several generations, tracing it all the way to Miriam. Because this Betzalel was a unique person. He was able to not just be a good architect and design the tabernacle. He was able to create the tabernacle using the same mystical energy that God used in creating the universe. Mishkan was a miniature universe, and you needed someone who had that divine prophetic vision and to be plugged into the dynamic, the spiritual dynamic of creation, to be able to build that Mishkan, even though he was a young kid. But where did he get that all from? That's why the Torah emphasizes who his father, who his grandfather was, and who his great-grandmother was, Miriam. Because he got it from his grandfather, not from his father, as much as from his grandfather Hur. What was so special about Hur? When the Jews wanted to build the Mishkan, the Egel rather, the golden calf, Hur was the second in command after Aaron, third in command, Moses, Aaron, Hur. Hur protested it. He says, are you crazy? What are you going to do? And the people said, we want a golden calf. We want a replacement for Moses. And some said for God. And he said, absolutely not. I will not let you do it. And they murder him. Because we know, after the story of the golden calf, Hur, who's the third in command, no longer appears in the Torah. His name is no longer mentioned as being alive because he was murdered. He was so zealous not to betray the trust between God and the people that he was willing to give his life for it. That determination, that devotion was what gave him the ability to produce a grandson who was able to create the Mishkan, which no human being could do without having this divine inspiration. But where did Hur get it from? He got it from Miriam, from a woman. Because the power that the women had in terms of their faith transcended that of the men. And this is another subject for another time and to go in detail, but if not for the women, the Talmud tells us, the Jews would never have been liberated from Egypt. The men gave up hope already. They realized that we're going to stay here forever as slaves. We'll never be able to be free. There's no point in having families, no point in life. The women changed that whole attitude. And in the desert, where the men built the golden calf, the women did not participate at all. That's why Aaron was clever. He said, I'm going to try to delay this whole operation. So what did he tell them? He tells them, take your wives' jewelry and your children's jewelry and we'll make something out of it. And what does the Torah say? What did they do? They took their own jewelry. What happened to their wives' jewelry? The women refused to give it. When they built the Mishkan, the Tabernacle, the women were the first ones to donate. And they dragged their husbands along with them. So when it came to creating an idol, the women resisted. When it came to creating something that God wanted, the women were the first participants. So, and who was the leader of the women? Miriam, Moses' sister. So it was her devotion that produced a son like Hur, who gave his life. And that in turn produced the great grandson, Betzalel, who was able to build this mission.